Welcome, everyone. My name is Lee Cunningham. I'm NACADA's web event producer, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to today's webinar, Nudging Students to Success, the Integration of Academic Advising and Motivational Psychology. Let's begin with having each of our panelists give a brief self-introduction, and we'll start with Heather. Heather, can you tell viewers where you're located and what you do there?
Sure. Thanks, Lee. Good morning, everyone. My name is Heather Luth, and I am the Assistant Director of Professional Development at the University of Redlands, which is a private university in Southern California.
Well, thank you, Heather. And next we have Jordan. Jordan?
Hi there. My name is Jordan Parshall. I'm an academic advisor with biology undergraduate students at the University of Missouri in Columbia, Missouri.
And our third panelist today is Nicholas.
Hi there, my name is Nicholas Holliday. I live in Springfield, Missouri, and I recently was an academic advisor at the University of Missouri in Columbia. But currently I'm a graduate student again, and I work for the Springfield Green Public Library District.
Thank you, Nicholas, and thank you all for being with us today to share your expertise with this topic. Heather is going to begin the presentation, so I'm going to pass the mic to her, and I'm going to turn my camera off while they're presenting. I will be back for the Q&A segment. Heather?
All right. Thanks, Lee. Let's go ahead and get started. So we've known for some time now that campus involvement is really closely tied to positive outcomes for students. Over a number of decades, various research has demonstrated the effectiveness of the resources we offer, things such as tutoring, academic advising, career services, and professor office hours, among other things. And all of this really stems from Alexander Aston's theory of involvement. Since its formation in 1984, it's been used to link involvement with things like academic success, retention, critical thinking, general abilities, and persistence. Similarly, there's a relationship between a sense of belonging and self-worth and perceived professor caring. In other words, students who feel that they belong are more likely to take ownership of their personal challenges and implement problem-solving skills rather than externalizing their problems onto others. So there's no doubt that these resources and general campus involvement are extremely beneficial for our students. However, it didn't take long after entering my career in higher education for me to realize that many student resources were being underutilized by students. Even though these resources are there, many students just aren't taking advantage of them. In 2014, I wanted to understand this issue further, so I decided to seek out data that would measure how frequently students are using certain resources and services on campus. So to find answers for my questions about student resource usage, I combined data that already existed with my own small-scale study that I conducted online in 2014 using SurveyMonkey. My survey data collected information from 2-year and 4-year institutions, public and private, across all ages and class years. So here you can see the data regarding academic resource centers and tutoring. Half of students reported that they did not utilize this resource in the past year, and only 1 out of 5 used it more than 3 times. This by itself wasn't a huge surprise to me. I could easily surmise that if students are performing well in their classes, they may just not feel that additional tutoring or study skills courses are the best use of their time. However, while I think you could argue that not every student needs a tutor, it is important for every student to build faculty relationships and mentorships throughout their tenure. This study from 2014 tracked professor office hour usage and found that 2/3 of students never visited their professor outside of class. About a quarter visited 1 time, and only 8%, which is less than 1 out of 10, visited more than once. This pattern is even more apparent when you look at student career center usage. In this sample, almost 3/4 of respondents reported that they did not utilize the service at all in the past year. Again, we see that out of the students who did visit, only half went 1 time. The good news is that in a separate study done by McGraw-Hill in 2016, 3/4 of students reported that they used the Career Center at some point during their college education. So even though the numbers are low for the past year, it is more positive across the student's full tenure. Finally, despite many colleges offering community service or volunteerism offices, we see a decline in volunteerism by about 40% between high school and college. The good news is that there is an exception to this trend that I've been showing you. When we look at academic advising, we notice that a full 90% of students saw their academic advisor last year. In fact, almost half saw their advisor 3+ times. This is a pretty amazing discrepancy. So when I found this data, I was curious about why students are more apt to take advantage of this resource among others. To answer my questions, I looked at several factors that can influence a student's likelihood of getting involved and engaging with their community. I learned from research conducted at Indiana University that female undergraduates are more likely than their male counterparts to engage in educationally purposeful activities. Another example from research conducted at Georgia State and the University of Delaware showed that student engagement is lower for African American, Latino, and American Indian students. And there were other factors too, such as the size of the institution, student ability levels, and previous record of involvement, and so on and so forth. But in trying to isolate the strongest factor related to student engagement, I concluded that institutional policy is the winner. If a college or university says academic planning is important, and because of that you will visit with your advisor before enrolling, then students will meet with their advisors. It's simply a matter of protocol on the road to graduation. And in fact, most universities do this, which explains why advising is so highly utilized across campuses. Similarly, if a professor says on their syllabus, you must meet with me in office hours at least twice this semester, we know that students will meet with them because they recognize that it's a key element in their course success. Sometimes we can't help but think of campus support services as auxiliary offices that operate on the fringes of an education institution. If our institutional policy reflects this kind of philosophy, then our students are likely to follow suit. However, when we tell students they must complete a community service project before they graduate, or they must see their academic advisor, it reprioritizes the importance of this work and reinforces the commitment of the institution to a student's holistic growth and development. Now, it takes a lot of time and energy to implement institutional policies, and there's a legitimate perspective that says that institutional policies that force student engagement are inappropriate. They're too paternalistic. Helping students make decisions independently is an important part of the educational experience. So what are some other strategies we can implement to increase student engagement? How can we gently motivate or nudge students to success? Nicholas and Jordan are now going to share some research into decision-making and social theory inspired by economist Richard Thaler and Harvard Law School professor Cass Sunstein.
Thanks, Heather. I believe that we all want students to succeed, which is why we're having this webinar, but we also know it's difficult to nudge them towards success. With that concern in mind, a few years ago, the Biology Advising Office at University of Missouri implemented new processes and nudging techniques for student success inspired by this great book. The false assumption is that almost all people, almost all the time, make choices that are in their best interest, or at the very least, they're better than the choices that would be made by someone else. What has been found by Thaler and Sunstein is people actually act irrationally, but in very predictable ways. In the book, Nudge, Improving Decisions, about health, wealth, and happiness, the authors attribute these irrational acts as part of the two distinct ways of processing information, the automatic and reflective systems of thinking. The automatic system of thinking is rapid or instinctive, what we might be described as gut feelings. It's uncontrolled, effortless, associative, and unconscious. Imagine a ball being thrown at your head. If you're aware of the ball, our automatic response is to either duck or catch the ball. But let's not rule out that third hilarious option of the ball smacking us in the head. The reflective system of thinking is deliberate and self-conscious. It requires thoughtfulness and effort. It's practically the opposite of automatic. It's controlled, deductive, slow, and self-aware. An example of the reflective system in action is solving the multiplication problem of 411 times 37. Of course, we would all just rather trust our gut when solving problems because it does require less brain power, which is why the automatic system usually wins out. But as the book points, we often make mistakes because we rely too much on the automatic system of thinking. Oh, and if you're still trying to solve that math problem, the answer is 15,207. These systems of thinking might be fairly obvious to each of you because they were to us. But we were surprised to learn just how deeply conditioned we are to respond to the automatic system of thinking, even to the point of irrationality. Here's an example. Behavioral scientists tested a theory regarding agreeableness and compliance to a request. The hypothesis was, when people are prompted with a reason, their automatic system of thinking would kick in and accommodate the request. The test was conducted while patrons waited in line to use a copier at a library. While waiting in line, the Confederate asked to use the copier without a reason, saying, "Excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the copier?" The compliance was only 60%. Then the Confederate provided a reason with the request. "Excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the copier because I'm in a rush?" The effectiveness of the request plus a reason was 94%. Then the Confederate provided a weak reason with the request. "Excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the copier because I have to make some copies?" The compliance was still high at 93%. What they found was about a 30% increase of compliance when people are provided with a reason. This reinforces the idea that many of our responses are automatic, will often comply with requests when given a reason, whether it's valid or ridiculous. I could continue this point, but I can't because I have more slides. As advisors, we should capitalize on the automatic system of thinking when working with students. When we can help to improve decision-making about academic career planning. It seems reasonable to say that people make good decisions in contexts where they have experience, good information, and prompt feedback. Conversely, they do less well in contexts of inexperience, are poorly informed, and in which feedback is slow or infrequent. These are the specific circumstances that Thaler and Sunstein have outlined in the book. Let's be truthful. When faced with a difficult problem, we all need that little additional motivation. Think back to that math problem, 411 times 37. Before I blurted out the answer, who actually tried to solve it? If you didn't, don't worry, we don't blame you. It did involve triple digits. But despite me asking, why would you even try? What was there to motivate you? Probably nothing, and thus why nobody tried to solve it. Except for that one nerd out there, and you know who you are. Think about this in terms of academic advising. First-year students are faced with lots of difficult decisions about transitioning to the university life, making friends, fitting in, study habits, and tuition, just to name a few. So when presented with difficult decisions in areas they have no experience with, such as course planning, understanding degree requirements, figuring out how to study for a class, it makes total sense why these types of decisions are avoided. We all know that practice makes better, but some of life's most important decisions don't come with many opportunities to practice. Most of us buy houses and cars not more than once or twice a decade, so it's understandable that these are stressful decisions. But we are really practiced at grocery shopping, and through that practice, we have the ability to anticipate when it's time to buy more milk. Simply, if the act is infrequent, it takes time and effort to remember how to complete it once again. For some students, there are procedures that they might complete only once, such as a course withdrawal form, filing a graduation plan, or a study abroad form. These procedures might not be inherently difficult, but daunting if not completed with regularity. Learning is most likely if people receive immediate and clear feedback, yet most situations are not structured that way. How about a sports example? Suppose you were practicing on a putting green. if you hit 10 balls towards the same hole, it's easy to learn how hard you need to hit the ball, allowing for eventual improvement. However, suppose instead when the golf balls were putted, you were unable to see where they were going. In that environment, you could putt all day and never improve. Some aspects of college are not designed for that immediate feedback. One example is course satisfaction. This requires a student to attend multiple class sessions in order to determine if that course is best for them. And I'm sure we've all had that one faculty member that takes forever to grade assignments. And go figure that the same mistakes made on the first assignment show up on the second. Career and academic major choices do not provide immediate and clear feedback. It takes years to receive any insight from those decisions. Self-control issues are most likely to arise when choices and their consequences are separate in time. Thaler and Sunstein break this concept down into investment goods and sinful goods. Investment goods are hard. We all know that we should monitor what we eat and exercise, but after a long workout, the results are not instant. I did not magically lose 20 pounds and gain a handsome six-pack after only one exercise session. And because of that, most people tend to err on the side of too little. I didn't see immediate results, so I'm not going to work as hard. Sinful investments is the opposite. It's receiving the immediate result or pleasure now, but the costs later. The best personal example for sinful investment is eating a half a dozen Krispy Kreme donuts. Super tasty and wonderfully good now, but weight gain and shame later. Students are faced with these decisions all the time, such as dropping a course, skipping a class, or missing an advising session. That hour of freedom and no responsibility is great at that point, but regretted later when having to pay the tuition bill, or the material pops up on the exam, or the course that's needed is full.
Thanks, Nicholas. All right, everybody, refer back to your pre-webinar activity if you completed it. If not, this was the example we encouraged individuals and groups to discuss. An academic advisor wants to increase the number of her or his students enrolling in courses as soon as they are able, rather than them putting it off, while also instilling ownership of their degree requirements. The advisor wants to create a balance between reminding the students and fostering ownership, so the advisor charts the benefits of different possible options. The diagram at the bottom of the slide is what we have dubbed the scale of agency to depict the different levels of involvement or control an advisor could have in students' progress through college. Examples of libertarian advising actions and results include providing too much freedom for students, which might mean not reminding them of important deadlines, like the last day to withdraw from a class, or what their remaining graduation requirements are. Results would likely include lots of students missing the withdrawal deadline and ending up with an F in a class, or not realizing what classes they still need for graduation, and then having to push back the graduation date to meet those requirements. Examples of paternalism in advising and possible results include putting too many registration holds on student accounts to make sure they do every single little thing we want them to do, which would mean more work for students and advisors and would probably take away from students' feelings of ownership over their degree program. Now, it's important to remind you here of what Heather said previously. Institutional policy is the most important factor in getting students engaged. That is absolutely tied to paternalism, but we need to figure out how to make it feel less forced because balance is the goal here. Send email reminders about important dates and deadlines, but only use registration holds for the most important issues. It's a Goldilocks situation. So let's discuss ways in which we can act out that balance as advisors. Thaler and Sunstein highlighted a few examples of companies utilizing choice architecture and striking the balance between libertarianism and paternalism. For those of you that have a Gmail account, you've maybe noticed that if you forget to add an attachment to an email you're composing, Gmail will prompt you with a window box asking if you meant to add the attachment. That's a nice example of the balance between libertarianism and paternalism. First, Gmail really cares about you. They want to make sure you don't look foolish by forgetting to add the attachment to your email. However, Gmail won't force you to add something, allowing you the option to have to send a second email with the subject line of, "Whoops, second try." Thaler and Sunstein outlined 5 components to become a good choice architect. As we discuss each of these, try to picture how you, as advisors, can utilize each component at your school with your specific policies and procedures to effectively nudge students without always slapping registration holds onto students' accounts, thus removing their ability to choose.
Believe it or not, we love defaults. It's such a pain when opening Microsoft Word for the first time and are bombarded by all the setup questions. Do I want standard view or modern? Do I want the green color screen or the brown? Choices and choices. I would rather just open the program and bam, ready to go, no thinking required, because thinking is hard. People prefer defaults because it does require the least amount of work, brain power, and the quickest way to start. And if given a default, we can expect a large number of people to end up with that option, whether or not it's good for them. The book references many small default tweaks that lead to great change in productivity or cost effectiveness. One example was during Obama's last presidential campaign. His chief campaign advisor changed all the printer's default settings to double-side printing, which saved the campaign over $41,000 a year in paper and ink costs. Another example of defaults are automatic renewals for subscription services such as Netflix, Amazon Prime, and Hulu. Those companies are so concerned that we remember to pay our bills, they created a process that does it for us automatically. How sweet. Similarly, universities utilize defaults with students in their academic careers. At the University of Missouri, students in the College of Arts and Sciences are required to declare a major at the completion of 60 credit hours. This process starts with placing a hold on the student's account, notifying them of the requirement, and forcing the student to meet with an academic advisor. A default like a graduation plan is designed to require the student to think about their academic career and make a plan towards completion. Other examples are immunization requirements and advising holds before registration. Both of those are heavy on the paternalism and light on the libertarianism. Defaults are sometimes inevitable, and many times universities cannot avoid choosing them. For other situations, a choice architect can create a setting where the chooser must make a choice. The book calls these mandated choices. Requiring a mandated choice involves the chooser in the decision and provides the chooser agency. Going back to Microsoft Word, by requiring the user to make certain selections to page layout and file storage, the user is more informed of the process and invested. Still, some people may consider mandated choices as an annoyance. Thaler and Sunstein found that simple yes-no decisions are best when using mandated choices. An academic example of mandated choices is third-party permission. In the U.S., for those who don't know, we have a set of guidelines under FERPA, which stands for Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, and it's a federal law that protects the privacy of a student's education record. Due to FERPA, parents and guardians don't automatically have access to a student's record. In order to allow access, a third-party permission form must be signed by the student, granting that accessibility. Giving the student the yes-no choice, while there are pros and cons to defaulting third-party permission, allows the student the choice and best celebrates the balance between paternalism and libertarianism. When utilizing mandated choices, a good choice architect designs an environment for the chooser to make the best decision. One tool that Thaler and Sunstein recommend is called anchoring and adjusting. Let me explain this concept in action. During an advising meeting with a new first-year student, it's time to add a couple general education requirements. Being a first-year student, They are overwhelmed by the sheer number of gen eds offered. To help with this mandated choice, advisors can provide a common gen ed course list to help guide the conversation. An anchor is a starting point, something that is known or familiar with, which allows for adjustment to help identify or estimate an answer. It's unreasonable to believe a first-year student is totally aware of all the courses available to them. But by providing an anchor of common general education course list, advisors can adjust the conversation about best courses that match the student's personal interests, career, and education goals.
Systems can often relieve the number of issues down the road by simply taking into account common or expected errors, and then trying to create safety nets of sorts. As we've already discussed, humans are predictable. That means that individuals are less likely to make the same or similar errors. That means that individuals are also likely to make the same or similar errors as other individuals, which leads to the idea of expected error. An example of this in everyday life is that there are different sizes of nozzles to dispense different types of fuel. Diesel nozzles are larger than gasoline nozzles, making it impossible to put diesel fuel into a car that takes only gasoline. It's expected that some people accidentally pick up the diesel nozzle, but the expected error keeps people from following through with that mistake. In advising, you've probably seen all different students year after year make the same mistakes over and over. I definitely have. So schools can help students, faculty, and staff by predicting what those mistakes will be and creating policies and procedures to help alleviate the negative results. For instance, colleges have appeal and exemption policies built in for all kinds of things. At our institution, a student can appeal their dismissal and, if granted, then be placed on academic probation. The expected error is that students who are dismissed won't want to leave school, so we have a formalized appeals process and the end result already planned out. Placing a student on probation can mean different things depending on what their major is, but it often means that student will need to meet with their academic advisor to discuss success strategies before being able to register for their next semester's classes. That support system and those required resources are built into that expected error situation in hopes that students will perform better in the future. Post-completion error is the idea that the main task is finished and then people tend to forget things related to that task. An everyday example of this is how often people forget their ATM cards in the machine once they've completed their transaction. ATMs are built to remedy this mistake because it's an expected error and because errors like that are even more common once people have mentally or physically moved on from a task. So, with ATMs, the machine will beep loudly at the person who's forgotten their card or even swallow the card to make it impossible for someone else to then steal it. For advising, there are lots of examples. One that I'll give is related to the orientation incoming first-year students have at our institution. As an example of institutional policy, which Heather originally mentioned in her section, each incoming student at MU must meet with an advisor to discuss their major and create a fall semester schedule plan. But then they actually go register for those classes with a student worker. We don't assume that a student who visits for orientation will necessarily have the correct schedule once they leave orientation. So we make sure to check each student's schedule online post-completion of our advising appointment with them. Even though we write out a schedule plan with them, we know that once they're no longer actually sitting with an advisor, they might not choose the classes we discussed. I'm sure you can think of many instances in which students' behavior once they left your meeting did not align with whatever plans you made together while they were sitting right in front of you. Providing feedback, especially timely feedback, is incredibly important when it comes to making sure people continue to make good choices, or make changes to be able to make good choices in the future. It's a pretty simple concept. If someone makes a mistake, how will they know it's a mistake without some kind of feedback? If someone does something well, how can we be sure they'll do it again unless they know that we would like them to do so? And the sooner a person receives that feedback, the more likely they are to continue the good behavior or remedy the bad behavior. Have you painted any rooms or ceilings recently? There's actually a ceiling paint that goes on pink but dries white so you know immediately whether you've already painted an area so you don't just keep painting over the same spot. You also know when it's dry because it's no longer pink. That's very timely feedback. In our university system, we use a technology called Starfish to communicate with students and about students. Faculty and staff from all across each campus have different levels of access to student information, but overall, the point of the system is that it improves communication and tracking of student activity. And here's the direct tie-in, everyone can provide each other with immediate feedback. Faculty can send kudos, congratulatory notes, to students who have done well on exams or homework, send flags, negative markers to note an area in which a student needs improvement, such as attendance, exam scores, etc., and even refer a student to a specific campus resource to improve student success. As an advisor, I can see all of those markers from faculty about my assigned students. So then I can also be a part of that conversation. If a student comes in to meet with me and I see they have a kudos from a recent exam, I can congratulate them. On the flip side, if I see a negative flag, then I can discuss success strategies with that student to help them turn things around. This creates a system of timely feedback that can really help students make appropriate choices and hopefully do so in a more timely manner themselves. One thing to remember with all of this is to balance warning systems. Too many may cause the user to ignore them. Faced with many reminders or feedback, the response will become automatic. We just have to keep our scale of agency in mind when using these types of warning systems so that students don't ignore them. Some choices are easy, others are difficult. A good choice architect helps people improve their ability to map and select options that will make them better off. There are two main ways to do that, by restructuring complex choices and by creating incentives for making good choices. To restructure complex choices, we can eliminate options by specific aspects. First, decide what aspect is most important. Establish a cutoff level, then eliminate all the other alternatives that do not meet that standard. For instance, if you're choosing a new apartment in a new city, you might decide that the aspect that is most important to you is commuting distance to your new job. So you establish a cutoff level, distance from the job in this case, say a 30-minute commute max, and only look for apartments within that geographic area. Next, you might decide that price of rent is an important aspect. So you do the same thing with whatever your budget tells you is your max rent amount. The apartments within that geographic region and below your max rent price are the places you can decide between. In advising, we help students with schedule and career planning by restructuring complex choices with the questions we ask. I might tell a student they only need certain general education requirements for graduation, which limits their choices from every single class at the university to looking only at behavioral science classes, for instance. For biology Bachelor of Science students, we allow them to take classes within foreign language substitute tracks in place of a foreign language itself if they wish. So we have printouts of those substitute tracks. We have even added the prerequisites for each of the classes within the tracks to the back of that printout to help students map out their path to fulfilling that requirement. For incentives, it's important to provide the right incentives for the right people. For a real-life example, a pizza parlor might provide slice cards to customers, so every time they go buy a slice, they get a hole punched. Once they buy 10 slices, they earn 2 free slices for their next visit. That's a perfect incentive to me as someone who eats a whole lot of pizza. Most incentives that students received are couched in terms of honors, professional or academic experiences, awards, etc., but can all ultimately be tied to money. Many honors or awards could come with actual scholarship amounts. Other things can be expected to help lead a student to later receive scholarships or a paid job because of the things they've added to their resumes.
Each campus's policies, procedures, and advising philosophies are different, but these nudging tools we've described can easily be used when advising students. Let us tell you how we use them. We're not saying that we've developed the magic cure to academic planning, but we do feel we've made a great start. At University of Missouri's campus, a student is placed on academic probation when the semester and/or cumulative GPA falls below a 2.0 or if 12 credit hours are not completed. The spirit behind this default is to alert students before they are academically dismissed from the university. In the College of Arts and Sciences, students are notified via email that he or she is on probation and should meet with their academic advisor to discuss positive strategies to get back into good standing. Utilizing Thaler and Sunstein's concepts, the biology department created an academic success plan for students on academic probation. Reinforced by the data Heather discovered, how institutional policy is an important factor related to student engagement, we start our process with a default, an academic/registration hold. We've mentioned our mixed feelings about academic registration holds, and with that being said, in this particular case, a registration hold is more helpful than harmful. Because if a student continues down the same path that resulted in academic probation, it will only end in academic dismissal. Students are emailed an explanation about their academic probation, as well as a link and instructions on how to complete the academic success plan with the advising office's contact information. This email is sent multiple times. Overall, the plan requires the student to list out individual courses he or she is taking for the semester, highlighting important information we all know is crucial to success. Information included is the course name and room location, the instructor's name, office location, and office hours, specific campus courses to utilize for those, specific campus organization and resources to utilize for that course, and during the advising session, develop new approaches to tackle the course material. The student completes the first draft of the plan alone, providing a space for practice and to create an anchoring point. The next step is for the student to meet with an advisor to discuss the responses, fine-tune, and adjust the responses while utilizing the advisor's expertise, all within one advising session. This discussion provides timely feedback to the student. The plan calls for the student to identify campus resources for each course enrolled that will help aid in his or her success. We created a list of campus resources and organizations for students to choose offered at Mizzou's campus. This list is located on the back side of the plan, and while it's not designed to be exhaustive, it does provide a starting anchoring point for conversations. Students will filter through the list and decide if that campus resource could be beneficial for a specific class, asking themselves a mandated choice of yes or no.
I hope you've noticed through today's slides that many of these strategies are closely related. While requiring students to match one or more of the listed resources to each individual class on their success plan, that process is also a part of mapping. By providing a list of possible resources to begin with, we've simplified their complex choices. MU is a very large campus and students can feel overwhelmed by it, but providing a list of the common resources we believe are most likely to be of help to students on academic probation is helpful in that simplified process. We also incentivize the entire experience by immediately removing their registration hold once we've discussed their entire plan with them. As Nicholas mentioned with the previous slides, a registration hold makes sense for this situation because we know that students on academic probation need assistance to improve their academic success. We've matched this incentive to this circumstance intentionally. In terms of expected error, you can probably guess what is likely to happen to the success plans of many students after they leave our offices. Those forms are simply lost. We make a photocopy of each student's success plan to keep in their file in our advising office, as well as give the student another copy to reference. Just because they've filled out this form to turn in to us to remove their hold doesn't mean that form no longer has a use. To the contrary, in order for students to be successful in the future, they should be referencing the plan they created and discussed with their advisor. If a student comes back to meet with me the next semester, I'll be sure to take a look at that success plan from the previous semester and ask if they're still using any of their new approaches what resources they plan to use for the new semester's courses, and so on. Although the document is only created with one semester's schedule in mind, it should be revisited. Better yet, students would be welcome and even encouraged to create a new one the next semester, even if they're no longer on probation. So, while we expect that a student will forget about their plan and even lose the form after discussing it with an advisor, we try to prevent that from happening so that it is something to which they can continue to refer in the future. Now that we've covered the nudges and how each works with our academic success plan, here's another look at an example of what just one section of the plan could look like. The course, instructor, and office hours, a couple useful resources chosen from the resource list to meet the demands of this particular class, and new approaches to academic success are all included. And, as we said before, the student would do this for every class in which they're enrolled. It's a very intentional process for all of the reasons we've already laid out, but really just one example of how we've put into practice the strategies we've discussed today. Now, these are just preliminary results since we've only been doing this for about a year and a half, but I can say that students on probation who completed their academic success plan have generally earned better grades in that semester compared to their previous term semester grades or predicted GPA if they were first semester students, than the probation students who did not complete their academic success plan. That's enough to at least make me want to keep using it. Okay, so what? Nicholas and I found that these concepts made total sense once we read about them, and even more sense once we started intentionally using them. But why don't we just all do it all the time? Well, for the exact same reasons these concepts are necessary. Even as advisors, we're subject to the same barriers to good decision-making as our students. Benefits now, costs later, degree of difficulty, frequency, and feedback. This short video to cap off our presentation is a fun way to see some more real-life examples of nudges.
Okay, thanks for paying attention. We hope you've been inspired and were able to identify ways to use these nudging tools on your campus to create policies and procedures to enable students to make better academic decisions. I think now I'm going to throw it back over to Lee to begin the Q&A assessment.
Thank you, Nicholas, and thank you, Heather and Jordan, as well for your parts of the presentation. Participants, as I mentioned before we began, the Q&A pod is available for you to text in your questions, and we'll get to as many of those as you can, and it looks like we have about 12 or 13 minutes left. We do have a couple that have already come in, so let's start with this one. Heather, this one is directed specifically for you. And it says, your data reflects a combination of institutions such as public, private, 4 years, and community colleges. Did you find a significant difference in resource usage depending on the type of institution?
Yes, but the answer to that question really varies depending on the type of resource that we're talking about. So one interesting finding was that community college students were actually more likely than their peers at other institutions to seek out tutoring or use the Academic Resource Center, which I found interesting. As far as the other types of resources, I didn't see a significant difference in my data, but that being said, I suspect that if I were to dig a little bit deeper, I might find some discrepancies. So a limitation of my data was I was measuring the frequency of the visits to these offices, but not the actual amount of time spent. And there might be something to that because some offices do drop-in, some offices are able to do hour-long appointments. And whether or not they're able to do that oftentimes depends on the caseload. And the caseload does vary by type of institution. So four-year private median caseload is 100 students, whereas four-year public, it's, or not four-year public, community college, two-year public, it's like 450. And so you may see more time allocated, more minutes spent using resources at certain types of institutions versus others. But I don't have the data yet that says that because of my measurements.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting. All right, we have, looks like about 2 or 3 questions in a row here about the academic success plan. So Jordan and Nicholas, I'm assuming those are aimed at you. So let's see, let's start, Jordan, I think, with this one. How do you know the academic success plan as a form students have to fill out as a form? How do you know that the academic success plan as a form students have to fill out is worth that extra step versus just having probation students meet one-on-one with an advisor?
Yeah, thank you. So probation students majoring in biology had already had to meet with an advisor for a one-on-one conversation. That had been in place for years. So this academic success plan is the only new part of that. And really it's formalizing the conversation and, to use some of our terms, offering more options for the anchoring and adjusting and mapping in a way that's easier for students to follow and something they can take with them. And if you look at that last slide with the graph on it, you can see that the students who actually filled out that form with their advisor or before meeting with their advisor and discussed it did have better GPAs than either their previous semester when they had been put on academic probation, or if they were first semester students, then better GPAs than what their predicted GPA for an incoming student was, as opposed to those students who just had to get the hold removed, you know, at the end of the semester when it was kind of too late to do the form. So yes, in short, it has been shown to be better.
Okay, good. And I think you answered another question that came up there as well with that, was about clarifying the GPAs in that last slide. So we had that question.
Okay.
Somebody thought they were a little confusing, so good. I think we got that answered as well. Did you want to say anything more about those GPAs?
I mean, I don't know exactly what they were confused by, but I can say that just so that my language is more clear, students who are starting at the university are given a predicted GPA, as I'm assuming most institutions do. And so if it was a first semester student, their GPA after completing the academic success plan ended up being higher after that semester than what their predicted one was. And then the students who had already been here for at least a semester, their GPA was higher after completing it than in the semester that put them on probation.
Okay, great. And then an additional question about the academic success plan. So Nicholas, maybe this one for you. Was there any pushback from students when they were told that they had to complete an academic success plan before they could register for classes?
Yeah, that's a great question. The students in biology were already required, if they were on probation, to meet with advisors to talk about it. But as Jordan said, this form really formalized that conversation, because depending on the student, depending on the time of day, depending on the year, the casual conversations we were having, they weren't uniform. And so this gave it structure, gave it a skeleton, and anecdotally, when I was there, we were working with it, a lot of students actually was really appreciative of the campus resources that we could use and kind of breaking it down class by class. Instead of talking about it in one big picture, we were able to go down class by class and discuss different strategies. So like I said, anecdotally, I did not receive any pushback.
Okay, great. And another one about that plan while we're discussing it. Jordan, what was the process, or was there a process of getting students to meet early enough with you in the semester so that it could be completed in time to make a difference, so that it matters?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as Nicholas said in the presentation, they were sent multiple emails. So we sent an email very early on in the semester notifying them of this, that there will be a hold placed on their account. Then we send multiple reminders targeting those students who haven't yet completed it. And we really encourage them to get in early, partly because we're going to be busier once registration for the next semester starts, emphasizing those types of things in the language of the email. And we have pretty good turnout for those students to come when kind of there's still a chance for them to use those resources to help them for the current semester.
Okay. And it looks like there's one more here about that plan. Did either of you find any students who seem to be overwhelmed by needing to address that themselves?
I'm happy to answer that if you want. I haven't seen that with students. It seems like they have appreciated that it is breaking it down. They're notified through email, but it's also actually, and I'm sorry, Lee, I'm skipping over you, but I saw a couple people mention Starfish for the alert system. We do put it all into Starfish, and so those students not only are getting an email from us with the instructions and the plan attached as a PDF, but they're also seeing that as flags in Starfish. And so there's multiple ways that they're alerted, and it's kind of makes it an easy checkoff list for them. And then because we make the academic success plan short enough that they can complete it with an advisor in an advising session, that means that if for whatever reason they were overwhelmed, they've been too busy, they forgot, they could actually do it with us sitting right there with them.
Okay, great. Heather, is your data published?
So yeah, I saw the questions coming in. I think I can answer them all in one here. So the data that I presented, there's some that I took from research that has already been published by other people, which is cited there under each slide, and I'd be happy to give that to anyone who wants to email me. What I collected was just a small scale survey monkey that I did online on my own, and I haven't published that. And there were some questions about that survey. So, the caseload and I think the mandatory advising. So it was students all throughout the United States. It was open-ended, all institutions, 2 4-year. And so there was a mixture of schools that had the mandated choices in their choice architecture where they required advising, and there were also schools that didn't. So that 90% includes all of them. And then what was the other question on there? Student advisor ratio, again, we're going to see a mixture because there was a lot of different institutions that were represented in that data. So, yeah.
Jordan and Nicholas, what was your student advisor ratio as well? Let's let folks know that.
When Nicholas was still here, it was in the 500s for each advisor. we've had a decrease in enrollment. It's now down in the 400s per advisor, for biology, I should say.
Okay, great. Have any of you worked with online students?
Lee, I saw that question. Sometimes on campus, we would have students complete this they were taking online classes, and some of the same resources that was on that sheet was applicable. But I also know that there are students that take 100% online courses, and when I was there, the MU Online office, they did some really cool stuff. They would send email reminders to students that haven't started any of their classes or any of the sections of their online class, because they could see that. So that's kind of an expected error that the MU Online built in, saying, hey, it's halfway through the semester, you haven't started one part of your online class, you might want to start looking at it.
Okay.
As far as that goes, I don't know if Jordan has anything to add.
No, that's pretty sufficient. I would say that nudges in general are things that can be used electronically, in person, all different ways. So the concept can be carried out in almost any environment, I would assume.
Okay. A couple of questions related to just maybe ideas that you have about other areas. For students who wouldn't normally be eligible for incentives like scholarships or honors, any thoughts at all about creative incentives for those kinds of folks?
Yeah, I thought about that too, Lee. Yeah, that's a good one, because maybe some scholarships or honors aren't able or applicable, or they're just not offered. I was thinking about that, and it kind of relates back to the investment goods from the benefits now, cost later kind of idea that we talked about in the beginning. You might want to couch it in, it's not what you're doing right now. It's not going to be the immediate scholarship, but what's going to happen and be beneficial later. So looking into career planning or looking into resumes, if there's something they can get involved in that isn't going to give them money right now or any type of distinction right now, but it might be beneficial because an employment or an employer might require an internship or might require some kind of experience in a specific area, working in a research lab or something like that.
Great, great. I'm going to take a question here that's rather specific and maybe make it a little bit more general. You mentioned finding the Goldilocks place, the sweet spot where it's not too much, but it's enough. So these folks were asking about a particular event, a workshop that they have a difficult time getting folks to, because they're maybe not everybody's understanding about not over bombarding. Do you have any thoughts about getting your information seen if not everybody's on board with finding the Goldilocks spot?
Yeah, I'd say that that's one of the hardest things in any sort of workshop, event planning, just getting people to show up. Everybody's busy, everybody's getting lots of emails. The incentives, and a student will say, oh, well, there's free pizza there, so I'm going to go. Stuff like that obviously can help. But the other thing I would think is thinking about the wording and design of those invitations, where you're publicizing the event, so that you're really hitting your target audience. And if you can put in the email other types of things that they might get out of it. And so if, considering what Nicholas just said about later on for career planning, stuff like that, if it's not just I'm advertising this event and you'll get free pizza, but I'm advertising this event, you'll get free pizza, and you'll get these skills or these other things that'll help you in the future, that might help.
And if I can just add on to that with a couple things that we do here as well. One thing that I found really helpful, if students don't come to the workshop, if I can partner with faculty and bring the workshop into the classroom, then I definitely will have 20, 25 students in there receiving that information. And I think they tend to take it more seriously because they see that their professor thinks this is important. And so they relate it back to integrating it into their academics. And I see a lot more follow-up from students with interaction with our office after that. The other thing that we haven't tried but we want to is exactly what we're doing right now with the webinar, bringing workshops to students wherever they're at online. so that if they have to be studying and they're in the library, they can still tune in and ask questions and get that information that they need. So it's just making it easier for them to make that choice.
And that is a great final tip. I think we're going to have to leave it at that because we have reached our time. So thank you all so much for being with us today. Great ideas, great thoughts to share. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, Nicholas, for sharing all of this expertise with us. And thank you to all of our participants who were with us today. There were a couple of questions that we were not able to get to. So again, feel free to email our presenters if you want to follow up with anything else. So thank you all. We look forward to seeing you in future web events.